Ever since Shen Jingqiu woke up from that high fever that emerged out of nowhere, Yue Qingyuan has come by to visit him several times during these days of recuperation. Touted as the world's #1 cultivation sect's main faction head, the things he must take care of are complex and many. Yet, he still has the time to take this younger apprentice brother's matters to heart. Shen Jingqiu almost felt moved. Perhaps the original would still be able to betray this kind of person without regret or mercy, which really goes to show just how much of a scumbag he was. Yue Qingyuan carried a snowy white porcelain tea set inside Shen Jingqiu's bamboo house, his eyes brimming with concern. How's younger apprentice brother's body after recuperating these days? Shen Jingqiu lightly waved his fan, integrating well into this atmosphere of brotherly affection. Jingqiu has never had any problems. I've made older apprentice brother worry again. Yue Qingyuan said, That means apprentice brother is ready to go down the mountain? Is there anything you need? The hand that was holding the fan wavered. Down the mountain? Yue Qingyuan said, Did apprentice brother's illness this time make you forget? Didn't you tell me at the time that you would deal with the problem at Shuanghu City, using it as an opportunity for your disciples to gain experience? Oh, so it's a problem passed down by the original. Shen Jingqiu truly wanted to find an excuse to avoid this problem. He still hasn't completely familiarized himself with his spiritual powers and techniques. How can he bring his disciples to gain experience like this? He hadn't even thickened his skin enough to say that his body wasn't well enough to go when an alert sounded next to his ear. The system coldly announced, Beginning, stage checkpoint mission assigned. Destination, Shuanghu City, mission, finish disciples experience opportunity. Please click to accept. So this is the mission required to transition from the beginning stage to the next. It seems like he has no choice but to go. Shen Jingqiu wanted to ask how he was supposed to accept when he was immediately confronted with the mission profile and 2 selections at the bottom. On the left is accept and on the right side, decline. He paused over the accept option for a while. It gradually turned green and a ding sounded. The system announced, Mission successfully accepted. Please read the file carefully for mission details and make appropriate preparations. We wish you success. Shen Jingqiu turned back towards Yue Qingyuan and said, I remember naturally. It's just that these days I've been lazy and almost forgotten about this matter. I'll depart soon. Yue Qingyuan nodded. If it is inconvenient for you, please don't be courteous. Getting your disciples to gain experience isn't something that needs to be hurried. Actually, you don't even need to supervise them yourself. Shen Jingqiu smiled, but in his heart he complained. Older apprentice brother you, don't you know you're exactly like that mission-giving NPC? It's been mentioned by the original Shen Jingqiu in the novel that he passed all his matters to Mingfan to carry out, no matter how big or small. As long as it's not related to the protagonist, this child's efficiency and intelligence are high. On the second day, Shen Jingqiu was already able to set out. Before leaving Qingjing Peak, Shen Jingqiu inspected his image again. He was dressed in white robes with a teal waistband and belt, a sword hanging at the left side of his waist while his right hand held a fan. He is exactly the picture of refined and tasteful elegance. Absolutely not OOC. Perfect. The white stone steps leading down to the mountain gate are hundreds of steps long. At the foot of the stairs are a horse-drawn carriage prepared for Shen Jingqiu and many riding horses for his disciples. Shen Jingqiu said, System, are you teasing me? If it's for a cultivation setting, why aren't we using flying swords to move out? The system coldly replied, Even if it is in a world with a setting like Harry Potter, not every wizard would go outside riding a broom. Too high profile. Shen Jingqiu said, You seem to know a lot about this. In the past, were you assigned to the Harry Potter's world? The system responded with a big line of ... Ever since the system was in service for so many years, Shen Jingqiu is the first person to pull off this kind of bullshit. However, after thinking it over, the system's right. This time, they're going down the mountain for experience. These disciples are mostly young and inexperienced. They haven't found their own sword yet. From the very beginning, under Changqiu Mountain Sect's guidance, The disciples must cultivate to a certain stage before they can enter the central area of the 12 peaks to pick a sword suitable for them. It's said that a person chooses the sword, but in reality, it's the sword who chooses the person. If a person completely doesn't have any sort of talent, but persists in stubbornly taking a top-grade heaven and earth spiritual power condensation sort of technique, not only is it like a beautiful woman getting hitched with someone ugly, it's also tantamount to a beautiful flower being inserted into cow dung. Think about it, even if the desire's there, the sword might not agree. Lord Binghe's golden finger started coming into play when he found his own unique sword, Xingmo. Shen Qingqiu entered the horse carriage. The carriage's exterior is generous without being ornate. Inside, it is spacious enough to lounge comfortably with a fragrant little incense burner lazily wisping smoke. After sitting for a moment, he felt there was something wrong. He lifted the window curtain with his fan and looked outside. No wonder he felt there was something familiar about this carriage. The little figure darting back and forth getting called by others to do things, who'd also clean his carriage. It was the handyman Lord Binghe. Lord Binghe finally placed the last item on the carriage, a white jade chest that Shen Qingqiu always brought every time he went out. When he raised his head and met Shen Qingqiu's complex gaze, he was surprised but still respectfully greeted, "Shizun." The injuries he received from the previous Shen Qingqiu's lesson had just about healed, the bruises on his face gone. Though he's young and his worldview hasn't opened up, it doesn't detract from his capable and noble appearance. With a straight back and that air of action, it's as though he hasn't been beaten and has cultivated on Qingjing Peak for years. Though he's doing rough work, his attitude is meticulous, and that seriousness of his makes it difficult for anyone not to like him. Perhaps Shen Qingqiu has some good feelings towards the protagonist because he originally held an interest in him. He is decisive when killing and differentiates clearly between those he should show gratitude or resentment towards, which Shen Qingqiu likes. Shen Qingqiu looked at him for a while, then said, He drew back his fan, letting the curtains fall down again. It has to be said, the protagonist is truly the protagonist. Though this kid has fallen from grace so tragically without any kind of prospects or background, he also had a big bunch of Woman 1, Woman 2, Woman 3, Woman 4, and so on hugging him front and back. This principle is that the person who looks best is the one who stands last. Of course, this also explains why his fellow brother disciples don't find him pleasing to the eye and want to smite him into a pig's head. He turns his thoughts over in his head once, then again. Not right. If there is a total of 10 disciples leaving the mountain, including Lord Binghe, then why did he only see 9 horses? There is still 1 horse missing. Well, even his toes know who must have done it. Sure enough, there's a snicker. Mingfan's delighted voice penetrated the carriage from a long distance. There's truly a shortage of horses. We can only impose on you this time, apprentice brother. Since your basic foundation is lacking, it's also a good opportunity for you to practice. It's complete bullshit that there's not enough horses. As the #1 cultivation sect in the world these years, Qingqiu Mountain sect is practically overflowing with wealth. How can they lack even a single horse? Mingfan is truly well versed in being a piece of cannon fodder. After a moment, he also said, What? What kind of expression is that? You're unsatisfied? Lord Binghe solemnly replied, I don't dare. Only a young girl's laughter ran out like bells. Ning Ying said, Apprentice brother, what are you talking about? Really, you always arrive at just the right time, young girl. Shen Qingqiu knew that Ning Yingying's presence acts as the worst sort of evil catalyst between Mingfan and Lord Binghe's interactions. As long as she appears, Lord Binghe will always have a hard time. Shen Qingqiu ventured to lift his window curtain up a little. True enough, he saw Ning Yingying excitedly waving her hand. Lord, are there not enough horses? Come and ride with me. Really brings a lot of hatred onto Lord Binghe. Even Shen Qingqiu can imagine the sight of Mingfan's jaw dropping to the ground. This protagonist getting the beauty is a common scene and very cool. Only of course it would easily increase the pressure put upon him by the malicious and envious. If Lord Binghe accepts Ning Yingying's offer, he shouldn't even think of being left in peace by the others. Sitting in the horse carriage, Shen Qingqiu said from within, Don't be noisy. Men and women shouldn't be in contact with each other. There should be a limit to the affection between you and your apprentice brother. Mingfan, why have you tarried so long? Why haven't we set out already? Mingfan was overjoyed in his heart, thought that Shi Zun truly had the same thoughts as him. He immediately pushed for everyone to start out. This small fuss set aside, Shen Qingqiu retreated into his own thoughts. He opened the door of the carriage a little to check that they were moving out. The expedition this time is not only the first going down the mountain scene, but also significant because this is a chance for Shen Qingqiu to see if he can undo the OOC freeze. He must treat this opportunity seriously. The contents of the mission file concerns a small city dozens of miles away from Changqiong sect. A series of murders emerged recently. 9 people in succession have already been killed. Every deceased person has a similarity. Each one had all their skin perfectly removed. From head to toe, the expertise of the killer was so high that it seemed like the body had never grown skin to begin with. Therefore, the murderer is called the Skinner. The officials have no way to deal with someone who successively killed 9 people. All the common people are panicking, and there are even some rumors that it's a work of a ghost. How else would this killer be untraceable? A few big families held a meeting before finally deciding to invite immortal cultivators from Changqiong Mountain sect for help. He's already read and reread this information countless times, but no matter how many times he's reread it, it didn't help. What kind of thing is the Skinner? He hasn't even heard of it before. Is this some kind of added scene or original part of the plot? Isn't it dangerous? Doesn't it require a high level of strength? Can he even face this thing? It's totally different from what they agreed on. When he was asking himself these questions, the system said, "What difference is there? Previously, you were a novel critic. You should know that the novel is a kind of artistic creation, and an artistic creation will have slight differences, and you have already become a part of this world. Naturally, you must personally experience the scenes of the plot and complete the originally omitted scenes to finish the story." Shen Qingqiu was helpless. He knew it was unavoidable. All he can do is to practice with increased effort to get accustomed to his Xiuya sword technique as soon as possible before they descend the mountain. Familiarize himself with all kinds of skills to prevent being himself from being played around with and killed by whatever obscure ghost or spirit he might encounter. The compartments in the horse carriage have all kinds of things. He was speechless at the fact that he was able to find 5 or 6 tea sets. He could still be counted as a rich little second-generation kid in his past life, but even then there wasn't this kind of attention to detail and sheer wealth. Luo Binghe is still outside. He has never let up his vigilance a single bit, always on the watch for movement. Outside the horse carriage, a trace of laughter seemed to travel through the air from time to time. Shen Qingqiu glanced outside. Luo Binghe walked alone at the end of the procession, sometimes breaking into a run. Horses purposely circled him, purposely kicking up a wave of dirt to make him look dusty. This is only a novel. Everyone is a fictional character made and acting out a plot created by imagination. Everything can be blamed on that stupid author for making the protagonist suffer, and frickin' suffer, you sister. But once the scene is played out in real time in front of him like this, it's impossible not to feel emotionally affected. Ning Ying tried to discourage the others to no avail. Anxious, she directed her horse closer to the carriage and called, "Shi Zun! Look at older apprentice brother and the rest!" Shen Qingqiu's heart was moved, but it didn't show on his face. Without much expression, he said, "What about them?" Her voice carried a deep sense of grievance when she said, "They keep bullying people because you aren't telling them off. If this goes on, Shi Zun, what are you teaching disciples for?" This can be considered lodging a public complaint. But Mingfan and the others don't feel pressured because the past Shen Qingqiu habitually allowed this behavior. The more they bullied Luo Binghe, the more Shi Zun seemed to be happy. Where is the conflict? Mingfan is the happiest. That day behind the mountain must have been the result of a crooked spell or skill that Luo Binghe somehow learned. Today, Shi Zun is here, so Luo Binghe is doomed. Shen Qingqiu let out an "oh" and said one sentence. Luo Binghe, you come over. Luo Binghe's face was dull and he seemed accustomed to this treatment. He said a single yes and approached. Everyone was feeling gleeful and thought that Luo Binghe was going to be beaten and disciplined again, but they didn't think that today they would be frightened into self-destruction on 3 fronts. Because Shen Qingqiu pulled open the door curtains, Luo Binghe proudly raised his head and looked inside the carriage. He didn't speak, but his gesture spoke for itself. Ning Yingying happily said, "Luo, quickly get on the carriage. Shi Zun is letting you ride with him." Lightning strikes from clear skies. If it wasn't because they had been with Shi Zun so many years, Mingfan and the others would have suspected that Shen Qingqiu was possessed by a demon. Luo Binghe was completely stunned, but he reacted quickly and didn't hesitate long. He replied, "Many thanks, Shi Zun." He leaped onto the carriage, honestly and self-consciously huddling into a corner, his hands and his feet tucked in as though afraid of dirtying the carriage chamber. System. Warning. Shen Qingqiu. Warning what? I wasn't OOC. System. It is impossible for Shen Qingqiu to commit this act of solving Luo Binghe's difficulties. Judgment OOC level 100%. Shen Qingqiu said, "If it was only for solving Luo Binghe's problems, then of course it's impossible. But right now my motive is to not disappoint Ning Yingying's expectations of me or her Shi Zun. Imagine, how could I be cold-hearted and let my dear little disciple be disappointed?" System. ... Shen Qingqiu. Therefore, my actions are completely in line with the logic of Shen Qingqiu's character. You can't deduct points. Aha! Through this exchange, he has already figured out some loopholes. The system follows rules, yes, but they aren't dead rules. Since the rules are alive, then it's in the realm of bargaining. As expected, the system hadn't thought of coping strategies. Shen Qingqiu felt so cool that he couldn't help letting out a laugh. Originally, he had been sitting quietly in the carriage and meditating, seeming to have fallen into a trance. But suddenly, hearing a laugh, Luo Binghe couldn't resist looking over. Honestly speaking, it would be false to say Luo Binghe wasn't surprised. Although he respects Shen Qingqiu, Shi Zun doesn't care for him. At first, he thought that if Shen Qingqiu asked him to get into the carriage, there must be something even more terrible waiting for him within, and he had mentally prepared himself for it. He hadn't expected Shen Qingqiu to not bother with him at all, instead focusing only on himself as he began to meditate. Luo Binghe thought for a moment. It seemed to him that he had never been this close to his teacher before, and he had never had an opportunity to carefully examine Shen Qingqiu like this. Appearance-wise, you couldn't complain about him. Perhaps Shen Qingqiu couldn't qualify as supremely beautiful, but he was certainly good-looking, and you wouldn't tire of looking at him. The profile of his face in a 3/4 view seemed to have been carved by creeks and mountain springs, and were not fixed in a cold scowl. It became gentle and bright. As soon as Shen Qingqiu opened his eyes, he found Luo Binghe staring at him. He saw a glimpse of the future Luo Binghe's unique grace, that of eyes like cold stars, a soft and radiant smile with muted words and quiet laughter. Luo Binghe had been caught red-handed, and right as he was struck, lost as to what to do, Shen Qingqiu smiled at him. This smile was purely unconscious, but Luo Binghe felt like he'd been pricked by a small, fine thorn. He quickly averted his gaze and became increasingly awkward, unsure of what he was feeling. Very soon, Shen Qingqiu couldn't bring himself to smile anymore. The system had delivered a notification. Violation. OOC. -5 points. Current points, 165. Shen Qingqiu said, "Even a small smile warrants a deduction?" The system most righteously announced, OOC is OOC.